Tonight we drift back through time, not to kings or empires, but to the quieter rulers of history, the pests, the scratching, buzzing, crawling nuisances that, without anyone's permission, have shaped wars, collapsed economies, and haunted entire generations. This is a journey through the strangest pest outbreaks the world has ever seen. It won't be terrifying, but it might make you glance at that shadow in the corner of your room. I'm the candlelight historian, and this is history as it was lived. Unforgiving, unfiltered, and brutally real. Now, relax, take a deep breath, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's late evening, a candle burns low on a wooden table, its flame trembling as though it senses something in the dark. You lean back, letting the quiet of history fold over you like a heavy, old blanket. Imagine standing in a medieval town just after sunset. The air is still and carries the sour mixture of smoke, dung, and damp earth. At your feet, something shifts in the shadows, a reminder that this world is not yours alone. Humans live here, yes, but so do the creatures that thrive on crumbs, waste, and a stubborn refusal to ever go away. Pests are the uninvited guests of history. They arrive quietly, usually when you're distracted, and by the time you notice them, it's too late. They've eaten your food, your clothes, maybe even changed the direction of your city's future. You can't win against them with sheer force. You can trap a few, squash a few, curse them loudly. But nature always has 1,000 more waiting in line. The story of pests is really the story of us trying to outwit nature, while simultaneously inviting it in. We grow crops, store grain, and build cozy homes with walls just thin enough for rats to squeeze through and insects to chew. We leave crumbs on the table, barrels of flour in the corner, and the faintest scent of warmth that says, yes, this is a good place to stay. If you were to close your eyes and listen now, you might hear it. The whisper of tiny legs, the squeak of something daring to move when the humans aren't watching. The history of pests is a history of movement. Swarms of locusts crossing desert skies, rats spilling off ships like black water, mosquitoes that followed armies as though they had their own battle plan. It's a history full of discomfort, strange surprises, and the occasional nightmare in the pantry. You might think modern times are immune, that we have pesticides in steel containers and professional exterminators with clever slogans and high-tech equipment. But the truth is, we're still just improvising. There's always some new invader, some creature that adapts faster than we can react. Outbreaks don't really end. They just shift to a new stage. Imagine, for a moment, that you're not sitting safely with a screen glowing in front of you. Imagine you're in a field, somewhere far from the modern world. It's the Bronze Age, and you've spent all year growing crops that will keep your family alive. Now the horizon turns black, not because a storm is coming, but because a cloud of living wings is rolling toward you. The sound is like rain, but sharper, more alive. Locusts. Within hours, what you've worked for is gone, stripped down to stems and dust. This is how people first learned to fear pests, not as minor inconveniences, but as forces of nature that could erase entire futures overnight. But tonight, we won't rush ahead. We'll take it slowly, as if walking through an old attic with a lantern, brushing away cobwebs and listening to the floorboards creak. We'll start by understanding this strange, unsettling relationship we have with these creatures. They've been here as long as we have, and if we're honest, they're probably better survivors than we are. It's strange, isn't it? We celebrate the cleverness of humanity, the inventions and the breakthroughs, yet we still lose sleep over a single mosquito in the room. We can land probes on distant planets, but a few pantry moths can make us feel like we're under siege. Maybe that's why these stories stick with us. They're humbling. So, as we move deeper into this history, keep the candle burning low and your mind open. Tonight, We'll wander through locust storms, rat-infested ships, and mosquito-haunted swamps. We'll hear the soft hiss of termites in temple walls, and the eerie rustle of frogs in ancient floodwaters. The first stop on this peculiar journey is one of the oldest and most terrifying outbreaks ever recorded. A living storm that swallowed whole kingdoms. The horizon is not made of mountains or trees. It's a rolling, undulating wall of movement. The kind of sight that makes your stomach tighten before your mind even registers what's coming. A locust swarm. It feels less like nature and more like a punishment from something ancient and angry. Imagine standing there in the heat of an Egyptian afternoon, the sun already burning through your tunic, when suddenly the light dims. At first, you think a storm is rolling in, but the clouds move wrong, faster, sharper. Then comes the sound. Not thunder, but the low, endless rasp of wings, like thousands of pieces of parchment being torn in unison. The sky thickens with insects until you can barely see your own hands. The locusts arrive in a living wave. They hit the fields first, chewing through wheat, barley, and date palms with terrifying efficiency. It takes minutes for months of labor to vanish. You could swing a stick, throw stones, even shout like a madman, but it wouldn't matter. There are too many of them. The ground itself seems alive, shifting with their bodies as they move on to the next patch of green. History is full of accounts of locust plagues. The most famous come from the Bible, of course, where they appear as one of the 10 plagues that fell upon Egypt. But these swarms weren't just stories told in temple whispers. They were recurring nightmares. Ancient Egyptians carved warnings about them into stone, as if etching the terror might keep it at bay. And even today, farmers in parts of Africa and Asia know that when the wind changes and the air grows heavy, a swarm could still descend. The unsettling thing about locusts is how ordinary they seem when they're alone. A single locust looks like any other grasshopper, hopping lazily in the sun, not bothering anyone. But under the right conditions, when the ground is damp, the plants are plentiful, and the population spikes, they undergo a transformation. Their bodies change color, their brains produce different chemicals. They stop thinking like individuals and start acting like a single, relentless force. It's as if they shed their identity and join an insect army with one purpose: eat everything. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. The constant rasp of chewing, the patter of insects hitting leaves, the dry clicking as they leap. The smell would hit you next, an earthy, sour mix of crushed vegetation and insect bodies. It's not just the crops that suffer. Every surface, every wall, every roof becomes a landing pad for these creatures. Imagine trying to sleep with the sound of thousands of wings fluttering against your door like restless paper. In 1915, a massive swarm swept across what is now Israel and Lebanon, devouring not just crops but the bark of trees, clothing left outside, even the stuffing in mattresses. People tried everything, banging pots, lighting fires, and forming human chains to drag nets through fields. None of it mattered. The locusts were like an unstoppable tide, pouring through towns and fields alike. There's something deeply unsettling about watching nature become unstoppable. In a world before supermarkets and global trade, a swarm like this didn't just mean a bad season. It meant starvation. Families would gather what little remained, sharing scraps of grain while watching the horizon in fear that the insects might return. And sometimes they did. You can almost feel the hopelessness of those moments. Standing in the middle of a stripped, empty field, the soil littered with broken stalks and hollow husks of fruit. The air is quiet again, but it's the wrong kind of quiet, like a stage after the performance has ended, and only the mess remains. But even in this chaos, humans tried to find meaning. Some saw locust swarms as divine punishment, signs that their leaders or priests had angered the gods. Others treated them as omens of war or political upheaval. When you think about it, the symbolism is easy to understand. A swarm is unpredictable. It moves as one, and when it leaves, it changes the landscape forever. If you were standing there, brushing insects from your hair, you'd probably wonder why something so small could have so much power. It's a reminder that history isn't just shaped by kings and armies, but by creatures that don't even know we exist. The locust swarms are where our journey begins, because they show the first rule of pest history. You can't always fight them. Sometimes, all you can do is endure. As the swarm rolls on, the fields turn grey and empty. The survivors retreat indoors, and the world grows still, but not for long. In another time and place, a different pest waits for its turn, a creature that thrives in darkness, scurries when the light hits, and carries with it one of history's darkest legacies. You'll hear it before you see it, scratching along the edges of wooden walls, its tail brushing like a whisper. The rats are coming. The sound is faint at first, a soft scrabbling in the corner, the kind you tell yourself is just the wind or the house settling. But then it happens again, sharper this time, and you know the truth. Rats. They move like shadows, blending into the darkness until you catch the glint of their eyes, or the flick of a hairless tail disappearing beneath a floorboard. Imagine living in a medieval town where rats are as common as the stray cats that chase them. The streets are narrow and damp, and the waste from every household is tossed straight onto the cobblestones. Food scraps, rotting vegetables, the occasional carcass, it all piles up. To a rat, this is not filth. It's a buffet, and they dine like royalty. You'd see them darting between barrels in the marketplace, snatching crumbs from bakers' stalls, or vanishing into drains when a cart rumbles by. The strange thing is, people didn't always hate them the way we do now. Some medieval households almost tolerated their presence. Rats were simply part of the scenery, as unavoidable as the smell of smoke or the tolling of the church bell. But the relationship changed. Rats weren't just pests, they were carriers, hitchhiking aboard ships, wagons, and grain sacks. They spread further and faster than any animal of their size should, and clinging to their fur were tiny passengers, fleas. These fleas were harmless enough, until they encountered something deadly hiding in their blood. The Black Death didn't begin with a bang. It began with a scratch, a single bite, the swelling of a lymph node, a fever that burned hotter with each hour. By the time the connection was made between rats, fleas, and death, it was too late. Entire towns were already collapsing under the weight of the plague. Picture this. You're walking through a narrow street in London in the 14th century. The air is thick, not just with the usual smells of cooking fires and manure, but with something sour, something that hints at decay. You hear scurrying in the shadows, and for a moment you think of the rumors. Whole neighborhoods gone, families locked inside their homes, sick and desperate. The rats are everywhere, moving fearlessly now, as if they know the humans are too weak to stop them. But rats weren't just carriers of doom. They were survivors, clever, resourceful, and nearly impossible to wipe out. Even as people set traps, poured boiling water into burrows, or kept cats for protection, the rats thrived. They found new hiding places, new sources of food. It's a strange, grudging kind of respect you feel for them, like watching an enemy who simply refuses to lose. By the time the plague had burned through Europe, killing millions, rats had already spread to new lands. They sailed on merchant ships, tucked into sacks of grain or scuttling in the shadows of the hold. They arrived in ports before traders even realized they had stowaways. Imagine stepping off a ship in a faraway city, thinking you're bringing silk, spices, or silver. But what you're really delivering is a plague rat, already sniffing out the nearest food store. Even when the worst of the plague passed, rats didn't go away. In fact, they thrived in times of peace and plenty. In the 17th and 18th centuries, as cities grew larger and richer, the rat population exploded. They slipped into kitchens, storerooms, and taverns, snatching scraps while people swore and stomped their feet in frustration. There's something almost comical about the battles humans waged against rats. City councils hired rat catchers, men armed with nothing more than a bag, a stick, and a grim determination. Bounties were offered for rat tails. Cats were encouraged to roam free in warehouses. None of it truly worked. For every rat you caught, 3 more were waiting in the shadows. Rats have been a constant thread in human history. They're there in the quiet corners of ancient cities, in the creaking hulls of ships crossing unknown seas, and in the forgotten alleys of modern towns. They've witnessed the rise and fall of empires from the cracks in the walls. Always waiting, always hungry. There's something almost comical about the battles humans waged against rats. City councils hired rat catchers, men armed with nothing more than a bag, a stick, and a grim determination. It's not a pleasant sound, but it's familiar. Too familiar. Our journey with pests doesn't end here, though. Rats are only the beginning of a long chain of creatures that have both helped and hindered us. Some are unexpected. Some, like silkworms, were almost celebrated, treated like royal insects for the wealth they brought. From the scratching in the dark, we'll move to something softer, threads of shimmering silk, secrets smuggled across continents, and a pest that turned into an empire's treasure. Silk doesn't seem like the kind of thing that would come from a pest. It's smooth, shining, and impossibly delicate. But the origin of this luxury lies in one of history's most fascinating and guarded secrets, the silkworm. Picture it, this tiny, pale caterpillar chewing away at mulberry leaves, unaware that its work is about to shape the destiny of empires. For thousands of years, silk was the treasure of China, a closely guarded wonder that nobody else in the world knew how to produce. To the Chinese, silkworms weren't just bugs, they were living gold. Entire dynasties depended on their shimmering threads, spun into fabrics that whispered wealth and power. For everyone else, silk was a mystery. Traders from Rome, Persia, and India could only gaze in awe at the luminous fabric arriving along the Silk Road, wondering how such a perfect material could exist. Imagine being one of those foreign traders, holding a piece of silk for the first time. It's soft, almost liquid under your fingers, glowing faintly in the sunlight. You'd be told that it comes from a secret known only to the East, and you'd believe it was magic. In some ways, it was. Each silkworm produced only a small amount of thread, and collecting it required patience and skill. But the payoff was immense. Robes that emperors wore as a sign of divine favor, banners that fluttered like fire in the wind, and tapestries that told stories in shimmering detail. The Chinese guarded their silkworms with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Anyone caught smuggling silkworm eggs or cocoons out of the empire faced harsh punishment, sometimes death. It was the kind of secret you didn't dare whisper, even after a few cups of wine. But, as with most secrets, it didn't last forever. Legend says that in the 6th century, a pair of monks managed to smuggle silkworm eggs hidden inside hollow bamboo walking sticks. They carried them all the way to the Byzantine Empire, quietly changing the future of silk forever. If you close your eyes, you can almost see them, walking through dusty roads under the weight of the sun, their robes hiding what was essentially industrial espionage in its purest form. What's interesting about the silkworm is that it's technically a pest. It eats constantly, chewing through mulberry leaves with single-minded determination. Left alone, it would happily strip an entire tree bare. Yet, humans saw its potential and decided to cultivate, not exterminate. For once, we didn't wage war on the pest, we put it to work. There's something almost poetic about that. Rats, locusts, and flies are chased away with traps and fire, but the silkworm, it was pampered. It lived its short life in carefully controlled conditions, protected from predators, and cared for like a fragile treasure. Entire households were dedicated to raising these little creatures, feeding them fresh mulberry leaves, and watching them spin their cocoons. Imagine yourself standing in one of those ancient silk workshops. The air is warm and heavy with the scent of leaves. The silence is broken only by the soft rustle of worms, chewing, and the occasional crackle of a fire used to soften the cocoons. Women sit weaving threads finer than a hair, their fingers moving with mechanical precision. The finished silk glows in the dim light, like water flowing through their hands. For centuries, silk was more valuable than gold. In Rome, a single silk garment could cost the equivalent of a soldier's yearly wage. And yet, despite all this wealth and beauty, the process always returned to the same tiny insect, spinning its cocoon, waiting for a chance to become something more. But pests have a way of reminding us that control is an illusion. Silkworms were fragile, vulnerable to diseases that could wipe out entire batches. One bad season could ruin a family's livelihood. Even today, silk production is a careful balance between nature and human patience. The silkworm story is almost relaxing compared to the darker invasions we've explored. But don't get too comfortable. Not all pests bring wealth and beauty. Some bring nothing but hunger and ruin. Our next step takes us back to the ancient world, 2 granaries stacked with precious grain. It's dark in there, the smell of dry wheat filling the air. But as you run your hand through the grain, you feel movement, tiny, hungry beetles chewing their way through the food meant to keep entire villages alive. The granary is supposed to be a place of safety. It's where the harvest rests, tucked away behind heavy wooden doors and thick walls, safe from rain, wind, and winter's bite. Yet, even in this fortress of food, there's a quiet invasion underway, an army of tiny jaws that never sleeps. Grain beetles, small, unassuming, and relentless. Imagine dipping your hand into a barrel of wheat. Instead of the smooth, cool feel of kernels, you sense something faintly moving. A whisper of life where there shouldn't be any. When you pull your hand back, a few beetles cling to your skin, their shells catching the light like dull armor. They're not dangerous in the way that rats or locusts are, but to ancient civilizations, they were silent thieves, stealing food one bite at a time. The oldest records of grain beetle infestations go back thousands of years. Archaeologists have found traces of these pests in the grain stores of ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, and even in the ruins of Roman cities. Back then, a successful harvest meant survival, and a single bad season could spell disaster. So when people opened their storage bins to find the grain crawling with beetles and their larvae, it wasn't just a nuisance, it was a threat to life itself. If you were a farmer in those times, you wouldn't have pesticides or fumigation. Your weapons would be crude, sifting, sun-drying, and praying. You might spread the grain out under the sun, hoping the heat would drive the beetles out, or you'd burn herbs nearby to smoke them away. But nothing really stopped them. They lived inside the kernels, safe and hidden, feeding quietly while you planned for winter. Picture an Egyptian worker, tired from the fields, opening a granary door to check on the stores. A faint smell of dust and old straw greets him. He takes a torch inside, and as the light sweeps across the floor, the grain seems to ripple. It's not the wind, it's beetles, hundreds of them, shifting as though the grain itself is breathing. He swears softly under his breath, knowing that each crawling speck means less food for his family and neighbors. Grain beetles aren't fast, like rats, or overwhelming, like locusts. Their power lies in patience. They eat steadily, quietly, and in numbers that multiply before you realize what's happening. In medieval Europe, farmers sometimes tried sealing grain with layers of ash or plaster, anything to create a barrier between the insects and the food. It didn't always work. The beetles could slip through cracks, burrow, and start again. Even on ships, far from land, they were a nightmare. Imagine being at sea for weeks, surviving on hard biscuits and grain. You go to fetch your rations, only to find them riddled with tiny holes, powdery with beetle dust, and, if you're unlucky, alive with wriggling larvae. You might brush them off and eat anyway, because what choice do you have? Hunger always wins over squeamishness. There's something unsettling about how pests like these turn the simplest acts, eating, storing food, into a constant battle. Ancient people believed that some pests were curses from the gods, punishment for misdeeds or neglect. Others treated them as inevitable companions, creatures that thrived wherever humans dared to settle. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the soft clicking of beetle mandibles working through grain, like distant rain on a roof. It's quiet, but relentless. And it's this relentless quality that links all pests together. They're not powerful on their own. It's their numbers, their persistence, their ability to slip past our defenses that makes them feel unstoppable. But pests don't always come in tiny, crawling forms. Sometimes they leap. Sometimes they arrive in waves, croaking in unison, turning quiet nights into a chaotic symphony. The next stop in this strange history isn't a granary or a field, but a riverbank, where the air smells of mud, the ground is slick with water, and the frogs have come, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, hopping into homes, temples, and dreams. The night along the Nile should be quiet, the kind of silence broken only by the soft lap of water and the rustle of reeds. But tonight, it's not quiet at all. It's alive with sound, a chorus of croaks so loud and so constant that it feels like the river itself is speaking. Frogs, thousands of them, everywhere. Imagine walking out of your small mud brick house after a heavy flood season, expecting to see the usual green fields and calm waters. Instead, the ground seems to move. Frogs leap from puddles, slide down the walls of your home, and scatter across your path as if you've stepped into some bizarre amphibian parade. Every step is a gamble. You're just as likely to step on something soft and squishy as you are on solid earth. The ancient Egyptians were used to frogs. They symbolized fertility and renewal, thanks to their sudden appearance after the yearly flooding of the Nile. In small numbers, they were even considered lucky. But when conditions were just right, high water levels, warm temperatures, and plenty of insects to feed on, frogs didn't come in small numbers. They came in armies. And suddenly, what was once a sign of life became a sign of chaos. There's something almost comical about it. Picture a farmer trying to sleep while frogs croak non-stop, echoing off the walls like a never-ending drumbeat. You roll over, stuff a rag into your ears, but it's useless. Outside, they hop over your threshold, into your kitchen, even onto your bed if you're unlucky. By morning, you find little wet footprints on your clay floor, and half-chewed beetles left behind as evidence of their night feast. Frogs weren't just noisy, they were messy. Their sheer numbers could turn fields into trampled wastelands. Farmers would try shooing them away with sticks or shouting as if that would help. It didn't. Frogs have no respect for boundaries, human or otherwise. If you were trying to store grain or dry clothes, good luck keeping them clean when half a dozen frogs decided that spot was perfect for an afternoon nap. The most famous frog invasion, of course, is the biblical plague of Egypt. Whether you take the story as fact or metaphor, it's clear that people at the time saw frogs not as gentle little creatures, but as a divine weapon. Imagine opening your cooking pot to find a frog staring back at you, or watching your palace steps covered in hopping, slippery bodies. It would feel like the world itself had turned upside down. But here's the strange part. Frogs, unlike locusts or rats, weren't eating the crops. They weren't chewing through grain or spreading disease. They were simply there, loud, relentless, and everywhere. It wasn't destruction they brought, but disruption. Sometimes, chaos doesn't need teeth or venom. It just needs to be unavoidable. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear them now. That low, rhythmic croaking, like nature's own percussion, echoing through the night. It's hypnotic, almost soothing when there's only a few. But multiply that sound by thousands, and it becomes something entirely different. An endless wall of noise that frays your nerves. Historical accounts tell of frog invasions, not just in Egypt, but in other parts of the world as well. After heavy rains in Australia, for example, locals have reported seeing roads so thick with frogs that cars skid over them like slick cobblestones. In some towns, people used shovels to clear the pathways, only to have the frogs return within hours. It's the kind of absurdity that makes you laugh and groan at the same time. Frogs remind us that pests aren't always dangerous in the traditional sense. Sometimes they just remind us that we're not in charge, that nature doesn't really care if you need peace and quiet. And speaking of nature not caring, we're about to meet a pest that is far less charming than frogs. It's small, fiery, and bites like it means it. The fire ant, an invader that doesn't just arrive quietly, but marches forward like a conquering army, burning everything in its path with tiny, stinging jaws. The ground looks calm at first glance. Just dirt, a few blades of grass, and the occasional dry leaf. But then it moves. A ripple of motion spreads across the soil, a shifting tide of red and brown bodies. Fire ants. Not one or two, but hundreds, maybe thousands, spilling from a mound that seems to breathe with life. If you've ever had the misfortune of stepping on a fire ant nest, you know what happens next. At first, nothing. Then a slow, creeping sting, followed by another and another, until it feels like someone's pressing hot needles into your skin. The pain isn't sharp enough to make you scream, but it lingers, burning, pulsing, and reminding you that you've trespassed. Imagine being a settler or farmer in the early days of America's southern states. You're clearing land, cutting back brush, maybe dreaming of planting crops. Then, one day, You notice these strange ants, faster, more aggressive than the ones you're used to. They bite, they sting, and they don't back down. You try to swat them off, but they hold on with tiny mandibles, injecting venom with every sting. Fire ants aren't native to North America. They arrived in the 1930s, most likely stowaways in soil shipped from South America. Once here, they flourished. They built sprawling underground colonies, each mound home to hundreds of thousands of workers, all ready to defend their queen. You can almost picture them as tiny soldiers, coordinated and ruthless, moving in perfect formation to overwhelm anything in their way. There's something both fascinating and terrifying about how they work. Unlike most pests that scatter when threatened, fire ants swarm. They covered their target, crawling over skin, clothing, or fur, stinging in unison like a single mind. Farmers have lost livestock to these relentless insects, and even now, decades later, they're considered one of the most difficult pests to control. If you crouch down near a mound, carefully, without touching it, you'd see them moving constantly, shifting grains of soil, carrying tiny fragments of food, or just patrolling their borders. There's an eerie efficiency to them, as if they're always preparing for war. And in a way, they are. Modern pest control experts use baits, poisons, and clever strategies to keep fire ants at bay. But there's no permanent victory. You might destroy one mound, but somewhere nearby, another rises. It's a constant battle, one where the ants always seem to have the upper hand. Now, picture yourself back in the early days of infestation, before we knew how to fight them. You're standing in a field, staring at a mound the size of a dinner plate. You think you can just kick it apart and be done with it. The moment your boot hits the dirt, the mound explodes. Ants pour out like liquid fire, climbing your legs, biting and stinging as you run. By the time you reach safety, you're covered in painful welts, and the mound is already rebuilding itself as if nothing happened. There's a strange respect to be found in this persistence. Fire ants are small, fragile, and easily crushed. Yet they work as a collective force that feels unstoppable. It's a reminder that some pests don't just survive, they conquer. But as fearsome as fire ants are, there's a whole different kind of nightmare awaiting us at sea. Imagine being trapped on a ship for months, surrounded by the endless ocean, and finding that your food supply is not just dwindling, it's alive. Next, we'll step aboard those wooden ships of old, where weevils and worms turned biscuits into dusty crumbs. And every meal was a gamble between hunger and disgust. The ship groans like an old man as it leans into the waves, every plank creaking in rhythm with the sea. The air is heavy with salt, sweat, and damp wood, the kind of smell that lingers on your clothes for weeks. You head below deck for a meal, hoping for something simple, a biscuit, maybe a chunk of salted meat. But when you reach for the barrel, you pause. Something is moving inside. Weevils. Life aboard a wooden ship was never glamorous, but weevils turned it into something closer to torment. These tiny beetles loved the very things sailors needed to survive: biscuits, flour, and grain. They burrowed into the hardtack, those dry, brick-like biscuits that were supposed to last for months, leaving behind tunnels of powdery crumbs and tiny wriggling bodies. Imagine sitting down with your ration, biting into what feels like a rock, only to find that it's hollowed out by bugs. Do you toss it away? No, you brush off the insects and keep eating. At sea, hunger didn't leave room for squeamishness. Sailors even had a dark little tradition. They'd tap their biscuit on the table first, just hard enough to shake out the weevils, like knocking on a door to evict unwanted tenants. If you were a sailor in the 17th or 18th century, this was daily life. Weevils weren't just in the food, they were everywhere. They crawled through cracks in the barrels, hid in seams of clothing, and came out at night to scuttle across the deck. You'd wake in your hammock and feel one brush against your hand, a reminder that privacy didn't exist here. The worst part was that you couldn't escape them. Once the ship set sail, there was no turning back, no stopping for fresh supplies. Weeks or months at sea meant making do with whatever rations survived. Sometimes, when the weevil infestation was bad enough, sailors would grind the biscuits into crumbs, bugs and all, mix it with water, and call it stew. The taste, while no one wrote glowing reviews. The captains and quartermasters tried. To prevent infestations, they sealed barrels with tar, dried the grain in the sun before loading it, and checked the stores as often as possible. But the ocean was unforgiving, and so were the weevils. A few stowaways could multiply into thousands by the time the ship reached open water. Picture the scene, the ship lurching in the middle of a storm, sailors clinging to ropes, the wind howling. Below deck, the food barrels rock back and forth, grain spilling out like sand from a broken hourglass. And in the middle of it all, the weevils continue their quiet feast, untouched by the chaos above. It wasn't just a matter of disgust, it was survival. Infested grain meant less food, and less food meant hunger. There are stories of sailors rationing moldy, bug-ridden biscuits, each man carefully picking out the larger larvae before forcing down the rest. In a way, the weevils became part of the crew, unwelcome but unavoidable. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the creak of the ship, the splash of waves, and the faint scratching inside a biscuit barrel. It's not the kind of sound that lets you rest easily, but as unpleasant as weevils were, they didn't kill directly. They were just one of many discomforts that made sea voyages miserable. The real danger came when the rats and their flea passengers joined the trip. Fleas, so small you could miss them entirely, carried something far worse than weevils ever could. Something that would darken the world, like no pest before or since. Next, we'll step into a time when a single flea bite could alter the fate of a continent. The age of plague is waiting, and its tiny heralds are already hiding in the shadows. The city sleeps uneasily. It always does when there are rats. By day, you see only a hint of them, darting shadows near the drains. A flicker of movement in the alleys, but at night they rule the streets. Their claws scratch against cobblestones, their tails leave pale lines in the dust, and somewhere among them, a flea hops from fur to fur, carrying something far deadlier than anyone can see. The Black Death. It's hard to imagine the power of something so small. A flea, barely the size of a grain of rice, feeding on the blood of an infected rat, and in doing so, setting off a chain reaction that would kill nearly half of Europe's population. This wasn't just an outbreak, it was a reckoning. Imagine living in a medieval city when the first rumors begin. A distant town where people fell sick overnight. A market where someone collapsed, their skin darkened with strange swellings. At first, it feels like gossip, the kind of tale that grows taller with each telling. But then, someone in your street falls ill. Then, a neighbor. Suddenly, the air itself feels different, heavier, like it's waiting. The fleas didn't care who you were. They didn't see kings or peasants, rich merchants or beggars. They only needed a warm body, a place to feed and move on. One flea bite, and the clock began ticking. Fever, pain, buboes swelling under the skin like dark marbles. In many cases, death came within days. The rats thrived in this chaos. The filth of the cities, open sewers, piles of waste, rotting food, was paradise for them. They skittered under carts, nested in cellars, and chewed through the beams of homes while families locked themselves inside, praying the sickness would pass them by. It often didn't. To picture a narrow street in 14th century London, the rain has turned the mud to black sludge, and the air stinks of smoke and rot. Somewhere in the distance, you hear a cart rolling, its wheels dragging through the muck. The driver calls out in a tired voice, "Bring out your dead." You look out the window and see a pile of bodies heaped on the cart like sacks of grain. And through it all, the rats scurry, bold and unafraid, as though this new world was built for them. There's a dark irony here. The rats weren't trying to spread plague. They were just surviving, following humans because where humans go, food follows. It wasn't their fault, not really. The real culprit was the bacterium Yersinia pestis, riding invisibly in the gut of a flea. But to the people who lived through it, all they saw were the rats, the endless, filthy rats. Some tried to fight back. Cities set traps, burned piles of garbage, even hired hunters to kill rats in the streets. Cats were kept in houses, not as pets, but as necessary soldiers in a quiet, grim war. Still, the plague rolled on. It moved with the speed of trade, carried by ships, wagons, and caravans. By the time anyone realized what was happening, the fleas had already jumped ship, literally and figuratively. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel the unease of that time. The way people avoided each other, the way markets emptied, the way entire villages fell silent. And yet, in the background, the pests thrived. Rats grew fatter as the human world shrank into fear. The Black Death didn't just change population numbers. It changed how people saw life. It left scars, not just on bodies, but on memory. It reminded everyone that nature's smallest creatures could bring kings to their knees. Our journey through pest history has brought us to this moment of quiet horror. But we're not done yet. Beyond the plague and the rats lies another kind of infestation, one that thrived in the chaos of war. On the battlefields of history, pests were often as dangerous as the enemy's swords. Next, we'll step into the mud and tents of military camps, where worms and insects gnawed not just on supplies, but on the soldiers' will to keep fighting. The battlefield is never silent, even when the fighting stops. There's the groan of wounded men, the distant clang of hammers repairing armor, and the muffled shuffle of boots moving through mud. But beneath all that noise, there's another sound, faint, constant, and unsettling. The soft chewing of pests, worms. War wasn't just a clash of armies. It was a perfect storm for infestations. Soldiers carried their lives in sacks, food, clothing, and whatever scraps of leather or cloth they could find, and pests carried themselves right along. Worms were among the worst of these hidden enemies. Not just the ones that lived in the soil, but the kind that found their way into stored food, leather boots, and even the seams of tents. Imagine being a soldier in a medieval or Napoleonic campaign. You've marched for weeks, the rain soaking, every layer of clothing until it's heavy and sour with the smell of sweat and smoke. At night, you crawl into a damp tent, your boots squelching as you pull them off, only to discover that something has been feasting on them. Worms or grubs, chewing through the softened leather like it's a delicacy. The food was even worse. Salted meat and hard biscuits, already unappetizing, could become crawling with life after weeks of damp storage. Soldiers would open a ration bag, expecting a handful of grain, and instead find it squirming with worms. And still, they ate it. Hunger on the battlefield doesn't leave room for disgust. You just shake them off, close your eyes, and chew fast enough not to think about what you're swallowing. Leather straps, tent seams, saddle bindings, worms and beetles would eat anything made from animal material. There are accounts from 18th century military camps of soldiers waking up to find their belts frayed and boots falling apart, simply because pests had spent the night quietly undoing their gear. You can almost picture the frustration of a soldier holding a boot sole that has crumbled in his hand, knowing he still has miles to march. Then there's the mud. Worms love it, thrive in it, and battlefields were often seas of muck, churned up by thousands of feet, wheels, and hooves. Soldiers slept on it, ate in it, and sometimes fought in it, meaning they were never far from something crawling under the surface. In World War I, the trenches were alive with pests, worms, lice, and rats that grew fat from the horrors of war. Men would swat at their skin, trying to scratch away an itch that never fully went away. If you stop for a moment, you can almost feel the discomfort, the damp chill of the ground soaking into your bones, the faint wriggle of something in the corner of your tent, and the knowledge that no matter how much you clean, they'll be back by nightfall. War brought out the worst in pests, but pests also made war worse. Supplies spoiled faster, clothing fell apart, and the morale of soldiers dropped with every bite of worm-riddled bread. You could prepare for an enemy's ambush, but how do you prepare for the slow, patient chewing of a pest that doesn't care? Who wins the battle? It's a grim thought, but pests have always thrived where humans gather in desperation. Fields of grain, crowded cities, cramped ships, and muddy camps. They take advantage of our messes, our waste, and our need to hoard food. On the battlefield, they were as inevitable as the smoke from the cannons. As you step out of the damp, infested tents of war, the air changes. It's warmer now, heavy, with humidity, and there's a new sound. The high-pitched whine of wings. This next pest is smaller than a fingertip, but it has shaped wars, forced armies to retreat, and carved empires down to their knees. The mosquitoes are waiting. The hum starts faintly, almost too soft to notice at first. Then it sharpens into that high-pitched whine, a sound that somehow manages to be both quiet and maddeningly insistent. Mosquitoes, tiny, delicate, and yet more influential in shaping history than some of the greatest generals. Imagine standing in a marsh at dusk, the air thick with humidity. The sun dips low, turning the water into molten gold, but you're too busy swatting at your arms to appreciate it. Something brushes your skin, a quick needle prick sensation, and before you can react, it's already feeding. You slap, you miss, and now you're itching. That single moment could change everything. For centuries, a mosquito bite wasn't just annoying, it was potentially lethal. Mosquitoes have carried some of history's deadliest diseases: malaria, yellow fever, dengue. Entire civilizations were built and abandoned because of them. Ancient Rome, for example, once ruled vast lands, but its marshes were notorious breeding grounds for malaria. Some historians argue that waves of mosquito-borne illness weakened the empire's strength, making it easier for enemies to push through. Picture a Roman soldier stationed in a swampy outpost. He's not worried about barbarians or uprisings tonight. He's worried about the relentless buzzing in his ears. He tries to sleep, wrapping himself in cloth despite the heat, but the mosquitoes find him anyway, slipping through the gaps. By morning, his skin is peppered with welts, and his fever is climbing. By the time the army doctor arrives, it's too late. Centuries later, during the building of the Panama Canal, mosquitoes were the invisible enemy. Workers collapsed daily from yellow fever and malaria. The canal project stalled repeatedly, not because of engineering problems, but because of these tiny, relentless insects. It took years, and a breakthrough understanding of how mosquitoes spread disease, before humans gained even the slightest advantage. You can almost hear what that must have felt like, lying in a hot, sticky cot at night, trying not to scratch, listening to the hum of mosquitoes outside the thin walls. Each bite carried a risk, each itch a reminder that you were at war with something you couldn't see coming. In some places, mosquitoes determined where people could live. Settlers avoided swampy areas, even if the land was fertile, because the risk of disease was too high. Colonies failed, expeditions turned back, and entire armies lost more men to fevers than to enemy weapons. Napoleon's plans to expand French power in the Americas, for instance, crumbled partly because his troops were decimated by yellow fever in Haiti, a disease delivered straight from the wings of mosquitoes. If you pause for a moment, you can almost feel the weight of that humid air, the slow trickle of sweat down your back as you swat again and again, knowing it's pointless. Mosquitoes don't care about your plans, your dreams, or your empire. They only care about the next drop of blood. And while they've caused unimaginable suffering, mosquitoes have also shaped human history in unexpected ways. The spread of quinine, a treatment for malaria, changed medicine forever. Military strategies were altered to avoid swamps. Some cities drained entire marshlands just to push the insects back. And even now, in our age of air conditioning and bug spray, they remain a reminder that nature always gets the last word. But not all pests carry their menace so quietly. If mosquitoes are the stealth assassins of history, flies are the loud, shameless opportunists. They buzz, they swarm, and they always seem to appear when life is at its worst. Next, we'll walk into the sweltering heat of fly-infested towns and famine-stricken fields, where the constant drone of wings turns the air into a living cloud of irritation and disease. The heat is oppressive, the kind that sticks to your skin and makes every breath feel heavy. Somewhere nearby, food is rotting. You can smell it, sweet, sour, and unmistakable, and then you hear it. The low, droning hum of a fly, followed by another and another, until the air is thick with the sound. Flies don't just arrive. They descend like uninvited guests at a feast, filling every space, crawling across every surface, and buzzing directly into your patience. Imagine trying to prepare a meal in a village stricken by famine. There's barely enough food to go around, and what little you have is constantly under attack from flies. They land on your cooking pot, your plate, your hands. Swat one away, and 3 more take its place. Even worse, you know where they've been. Crawling over waste, carcasses, and things best left unnamed. Every bite of food is now a gamble with sickness. Flies are nature's recyclers, drawn to decay and filth. But when they gather in numbers, they become something else entirely. In ancient and medieval cities, outbreaks of flies were often tied to disease. They carried filth from open sewers, from dead animals left in the streets, from the piles of refuse that grew higher with each passing day. You can almost picture the scene, a butcher's stall in summer, meat hanging in the open air, the hum of flies rising like a chorus of tiny saws in times of war. Flies were an even bigger problem. On battlefields, they swarmed over the wounded and the dead, spreading infection faster than doctors could treat it. Picture a military surgeon in the 19th century, working under the blazing sun, trying to dress wounds while flicking flies from the patient's skin. The insects weren't just annoying, they were deadly, turning simple injuries into festering infections. The biblical story of the plague of flies wasn't just metaphorical. In ancient Egypt, the combination of heat, flooding, and decay could spark infestations that seemed almost supernatural. Imagine walking through your home, finding flies everywhere, buzzing against windows, gathering on your bread, even crawling across your face while you sleep. It would feel less like an inconvenience and more like a curse. There's a reason people have hated flies for as long as history remembers. They have no fear, no respect for boundaries. They land exactly where you don't want them to, as if daring you to do something about it. Swatting them is a temporary victory at best. For every one you kill, 10 more seem to show up, buzzing like tiny, taunting soldiers. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear that constant hum, a sound that's just loud enough to keep your thoughts from settling, just irritating enough to make you clench your jaw. It's strange how something so small can unravel a person's calm so quickly. But flies weren't just a rural or battlefield problem. They invaded cities, too. In 19th century London, during the hottest summers, swarms of flies were so thick that people had to cover their food instantly or risk it becoming black with insects in minutes. Street vendors waved rags continuously to keep them off their goods, though it often didn't work. Unlike mosquitoes, which strike silently, flies are brazen. They'll land on your hand while you're eating, on your lips while you're speaking. And while they may not carry the same deadly reputation as fleas or mosquitoes, they've still been responsible for countless outbreaks of illness through the centuries. From the buzzing chaos of flies, we turn to a more peculiar kind of invasion, one that feels almost surreal. Not filthy, not disease-ridden, but still unsettling. Imagine a palace, elegant and pristine, only to find its corridors crawling with tiny, whiskered invaders. Our next chapter leads us into the royal chambers, where mice scurry beneath thrones and chew through the fabric of power itself. Royalty is supposed to command respect, not squeaks. And yet, behind the polished floors and velvet curtains of history's greatest palaces, there was always a quiet army of intruders. Mice, small, quick, and utterly unimpressed by crowns or titles. Imagine being a servant in a 17th century palace. You're tasked with carrying trays of food to the banquet hall, the scent of roasted meats and warm bread filling the air. But before you even make it to the table, you see them. Tiny whiskered faces peeking out from beneath the long tablecloths, their noses twitching. The royalty might be preparing for a feast, but the mice are already there, claiming their share. Palaces, for all their grandeur, were perfect for pests. There were stores of grain, hidden cellars of wine, and endless corners and crevices where mice could build their nests. Kitchens buzzed with activity day and night, which meant scraps everywhere. It didn't matter if you were a peasant's hut or the court of Louis XIV. If you had food and warmth, you had mice. Picture Versailles, glittering under candlelight, a ballroom filled with nobility, music, and laughter. Somewhere, behind the gilded walls, a mouse scurries through the larder, nibbling on sugar meant for the king's dessert. Servants whisper and swat brooms, but the mice know the game. They vanish into the shadows, only to return when the room falls quiet. In some places, the mice problem became so bad that royalty kept cats in their chambers. Not pampered, decorative cats, but working cats, stealthy, lean hunters trained to patrol hallways at night. Even with cats, it was a losing battle. Mice multiply fast, and where one dares to sneak in, 10 more are waiting nearby. It's almost comical to imagine a queen, dressed in silks and jewels, lifting her skirts with a shriek because a mouse darted across the floor. Even kings weren't immune to these surprises. In some royal courts, mice were known to chew through expensive fabrics, gnawing at the hems of robes or the edges of tapestries. A single mouse could undo hours of a tailor's work in one night. But mice weren't just a palace problem. They were everywhere. Ships carried them across oceans. Cities provided endless hiding places, and granaries offered a feast with no cover charge. In times of famine or siege, they were both hated and, occasionally, eaten. There are stories from medieval towns under siege where mice became an accidental food source. You probably don't want to imagine what that tasted like. The odd thing about mice is that they're almost cute. Not when they're running across your kitchen counter, of course, but in a vacuum, they're tiny, bright-eyed creatures that don't seem threatening. Yet they've spread disease, ruined food supplies, and left claw marks on history in their own quiet way. If you close your eyes now, you can almost hear them. The faint, quick patter of tiny feet across wooden floors. The soft, gnawing sound of teeth on wood. They're subtle, but persistent, as if reminding you that no place, no matter how grand, is beyond their reach. From the warmth of royal halls, we'll step into something far older and more fragile. Not a palace this time, but a temple. A place meant to last forever, built with reverence and carved with care. Yet even here, pests found a way. Silent, tireless termites, chewing through sacred wood, and leaving once mighty structures hollow from the inside. The temple is quiet. Dust hangs in the sunlight, swirling lazily like golden mist. The air smells of old incense and stone, a scent that feels ancient even to those who enter today. It's easy to believe that this place will last forever. The walls are carved with stories, the beams of sacred wood polished by centuries of hands. But look closer and you'll see the truth, even here. Something is eating away at the past. Termites. Termites are the slow destroyers. They don't scurry like rats or buzz like flies. They work in silence, hidden behind walls and under floors, chewing through wood so quietly that by the time you notice them, the damage is already done. In ancient temples, where wood often supported roofs or doors, termites were an invisible threat. A single colony could hollow out entire beams, leaving the structure looking perfect on the outside, but ready to collapse with the lightest touch. Imagine being a caretaker of a grand temple in Southeast Asia centuries ago. Each morning, you sweep the stone steps, light incense, and admire the craftsmanship of the wooden ceilings. But one day, you notice the faintest trail of dust beneath a doorway, like tiny grains of sand. You brush it away, thinking nothing of it. A week later, the doorway feels softer, weaker. Then you realize the wood has become thin as paper. Termites don't rest. They tunnel constantly, their tiny jaws clicking as they break down the fibers of wood. You can almost hear it if you close your eyes, a faint, rhythmic chewing, like distant rain tapping on leaves. The sound is unsettling, not because it's loud, but because it speaks of something happening right under your feet. In ancient civilizations, pests like termites were often seen as bad omens. How else could you explain a sacred temple suddenly weakening, its once mighty beams crumbling to dust? priests might have performed rituals or burned fragrant herbs to ward off the unseen destroyers. But no ceremony could stop them. Termites don't care about prayers or offerings. Even modern history is full of stories about termites silently erasing centuries of work. In some places, temples that had stood for hundreds of years collapsed because the wooden supports had been hollowed out like the shell of a fruit. Archaeologists studying old ruins often find that what looks like decay is in fact the aftermath of centuries of quiet feasting by these creatures. There's something poetic in the way termites work. They don't cause chaos like locusts or ants. They erase history one bite at a time, turning grand structures into dust without anyone realizing it's happening. It's like time itself, slow but unstoppable. Picture walking through an abandoned temple. The air is heavy, the silence thick. You run your hand along a wooden column, expecting it to feel solid, but instead, it flakes under your touch. The surface is still painted with faded colors, but inside, it's hollow. It feels like holding the memory of a building rather than the building itself. Termites remind us that nothing we build is truly permanent. No empire, no monument, no house. Everything is temporary if nature decides it wants the space back. And yet, pests like termites have always coexisted with us. We build, they invade. We patch and repair, they return. It's a cycle as old as humanity itself. As our journey nears its end, we return to the present day. You might think modern technology, steel, and concrete have freed us from these-age-old battles. But pests have not gone away. If anything, they've adapted, finding new ways to remind us that they're still here. The final chapter brings us to the modern world, where cities are cleaner but still vulnerable, and pests continue their quiet war. One we will likely never truly win. The city lights glow softly against the night sky, neon reflections shimmering on glass windows and wet pavements. Modern life feels untouchable, doesn't it? We live in towers of steel and concrete, eat food wrapped in plastic, and rely on gadgets that promise control over everything. But the pests are still here. They've just learned to play the modern game. Think of the cockroach. It's the ultimate survivor. The one creature you'll find lurking under kitchen counters from Bangkok to New York. No matter how sleek the skyscraper or how advanced the cleaning products, cockroaches thrive in the cracks we forget. They're not picky. A crumb dropped under a couch, a damp corner in the basement, a cardboard box left too long, they'll find it. And when they do, they bring that familiar sense of unease. A reminder that nature is always closer than we like to admit. Or take bedbugs, tiny vampires of the modern age. They don't care if you live in a palace or a studio apartment. They arrive uninvited, often hitchhiking in your luggage after a hotel stay. And once they settle in, they're nearly impossible to evict. Imagine lying in a warm, clean bed, thinking, you're safe, only to wake with little red welts. It's a discomfort that transcends centuries. A feeling our ancestors would recognize instantly. Even rats, those old adversaries, haven't gone anywhere. In fact, in some cities, they've grown bolder, smarter. The back alleys and subway tunnels are their kingdoms now, where they thrive on our leftovers and slip through places we don't even notice. There are stories of rats learning to avoid traps, of colonies coordinating raids on dumpsters as if they've been watching us closely, which, in truth, they have. Then there are the new invaders. Invasive species, ants that swarm entire neighborhoods, beetles that eat through modern crops, and even locusts that still darken skies in some corners of the world. Technology may have changed the battlefield, but the war hasn't ended. If you close your eyes, you might hear it. The faint rustle in the walls of an apartment block, the whisper of wings near a lamppost, the soft scuttle of legs on concrete. These sounds aren't loud, but they're there, just as they've always been. The strangest thing about pests is that they seem to thrive on our success. The more we build, the more we store, the more we expand, the more opportunities they find. Every modern kitchen is a banquet, if you're small enough to fit through a gap. Every high-rise is just a vertical maze with plenty of hiding spots. Yet, there's something oddly humbling about this. We like to think of ourselves as masters of the planet, but pests remind us that we're just one species among many. They don't care about our plans, our deadlines, or our inventions. They were here before skyscrapers, and they'll be here long after. As the night deepens, the journey through pest history winds down. From locust storms that stripped ancient fields to the quiet termites hollowing temples. From the buzzing flies of war-torn fields to the modern bedbug wars in city hotels, pests are the quiet companions of human history. We don't invite them, but they always find a way to join us. Now, the candlelight flickers low. The streets outside are quiet. Somewhere, perhaps, a mouse scurries in a dark corner, or a single mosquito hums against a window pane. But for now, the world feels still, as if the pests are sleeping too. Take a breath, let the hum of modern life fade, and imagine the quiet of a world long before yours. History is full of strange and unsettling things, but tonight, it can also lull you to rest. The journey is over, and the pests, for now, are far away. The story slows now, the noise of history fading into a gentle hush. The candle burns low, its soft light casting a warm, steady glow against the dark. You can let go of the images we've walked through, the rustling of rats, the hum of mosquitoes, the endless buzzing of flies. They belong to another time. Far from the quiet of this moment, breathe in slowly, as if drawing in the cool night air of a distant countryside. Exhale gently, letting the tension slip away like sand through an open hand. Every breath carries you further from the crawling and scratching of the past, and deeper into calm stillness. Picture yourself in an open field at dusk. The sky is painted in soft shades of violet and gold. The air is still, except for the faint rustle of grass and the breeze. There's no rush here, no footsteps behind you, no pests in sight. Just the simple, quiet rhythm of the world slowing down, as if the earth itself is settling in for the night. In the distance, you see the flicker of fireflies, tiny sparks glowing gently in the warm air. They move slowly, rising and falling, as though they're breathing with you. You can almost feel the softness of the grass beneath your fingertips, and hear the slow hum of crickets blending into the background. Allow yourself to rest in this place, where time doesn't matter. Your body feels heavier now, your mind quieter, like still water at the bottom of a calm well. Whatever thoughts remain can drift away, like petals floating on the surface of a stream. The journey through history has ended, and all that's left is this deep, soothing stillness. You're safe, you're warm, and the night will hold you until morning. Sleep well, and good night.